I'm so nervous. Like, Caring Conversations started on Instagram, Instagram Live, and it actually started the day George Floyd's memorials first began. And this is our very first debut on our YouTube channel. So, welcome. Delighted to have you here. Phoenix Foundation, thank you so much for this opportunity to have a global dialogue. The response to what we announced was immediate. I saw this post about today's conversation was shared widely across the internet. And hello to Norway. I saw your post. Thank you so much for sharing this information amongst your group. I am encouraged to know that there is a global desire to talk about these things in a caring and compassionate way. So what you're looking at is the Juneteenth flag. This is the flag that commemorates Juneteenth. And it is my honor to hold this presentation on Juneteenth. As an African American, this symbol, this date, represents June 19, 1865. In Galveston, Texas, this is when the Emancipation Proclamation was read to slaves who were still in bondage. Now, take note, Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation was officially ratified and accepted in 1863, but it was nearly 2.5 years later that these slaves in Texas were freed. And I think it's just so dynamic that I was asked to talk about change on June 19th because caring conversations usually happen on Thursdays. But when my mentor and friend, Clive, decided or suggested that I present on Friday, I was welcome to the opportunity. And in the greater context of talking about change, you could not ask for better positioning than to talk about slavery in the sense of change. Like, if we need any understanding that we are a resilient people and that we can indeed do anything, it would be in the context of this wider understanding. So, happy Juneteenth. Now let's get into the wonderful things about our dialogue. And I hope I impress you right now because I'm going to show you what I have learned to do. There we go. Ta-da! Look at me. See, you can see me now. Okay, now I'm super happy about that because we've done so many upgrades preparing for this YouTube moment and for the honor of speaking with the global audience. And I even have a fancier camera, but I was too nervous that it might glitch when I was doing the test run, and I'm like, no. So you have the MacBook camera, so bear with me if the quality isn't as pristine as 4K, but I just didn't want to take that risk with you all. Like, I'm still learning internet speeds and all of that, and no, not on Dr. Keisha Cares watch. Maybe next week. Okay, so let's get into why we're here, right? So there is an overview. I have my trusty stormtrooper leading the way. We're going to have a caring conversation about talking to young children in a time of change. Change is a heavy word right now, given everything that's happening. So I have this wonderful overview that's going to walk you through what to expect. We're going to start off with the conversation about change. I have some great research, some things I want to share to prepare you as the adult who may be having this conversation with young children. I am prepared to talk about this in depth from the birth, early childhood stage, all the way up until elementary. And then I have a wealth of books that I have curated particularly for this topic, but this is a conversation. And so if you've seen previous Carrie conversations, I am always the one saying, is there a question? Is there a question? Does anyone have a question? Well, with this upgrade, I am delighted to tell you I can stop doing that. At the bottom, you see a beautiful blue banner that always invites you to share your questions in the comment section. Definitely want to highlight that at any point during this conversation, oh my God, bring me a book is here. Sorry. Let me focus. Maybe I need to stop looking at the comments because I'm going to go into full friend mode. Let me focus. Oh, so many awesome people are here. We're going to have such a great time, guys. All right, getting back to it. At any point in this dialogue, if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the comments section. I'm going to keep moving while we're having the dialogue, so you are welcome to always ask a question. And I will stop every now and then and look at the comment section. So before we get into it, I just wanted to set that norm, welcome you into the room. We're going to have a great conversation. And at any point, you're welcome to ask a question. But you no longer have to worry about me asking you, is there a question? Is there a question? We're done with that. So woohoo. With that being said, let's get into it. So in the context of talking about change, I have situated this entire conversation from a global standpoint. Because if we're going to talk about change, it wouldn't be fair if we only looked at it from one position. And so the ideal starting point to talk about change from a global perspective are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because these goals represent a global agreement around things or changes that our global governments have decided, yes, this is something we're going to address. And so I want to root our conversation under the goals of quality education, reducing inequalities, so number 4, number 10, and number 16, which is peace and justice and strong institutions. But I don't want to limit the goals to just the ones I've listed. When we talk about change, it can apply to any one of these 17 goals. But given the context of Juneteenth, the larger situation of where I'm looking at it from my perspective, as an African American who has lived globally, I am going to really focus on quality education, goal number 4, goal number 10. I'm going to talk about reducing inequalities from a global perspective. And I'm also going to speak on peace and justice in the sense of how we reduce inequalities. But all of this is to prepare you to talk about these things with young children. Okay? And we're going to use picture books to reinforce this. But for the beginning of this conversation, this is me having a conversation with you as the adult who's going to have this conversation with younger children. I'm here to empower you. I want to be, your coach, your lifelong friend and mentor walking along this path of change with you. So let's get into it. The funny thing is that the very first time I did a presentation when I launched Dr. Keisha Cares, I did it with the Phoenix Foundation. Yes, you guys were like my starting point. And when we had our conversation, that was on May 29th, right? And at that time, I was talking to you all about you can do hard things. And I was geeking out. I was geeking out on children's books that really showed how you can have these conversations with young children. And I still geek out on children's books. But what's interesting is as we talk about change today, how much has changed since May 29th versus now? Like when I was talking to you on May 29th, there was some tensions arising in the global world, and I was coming from a Hong Kong Hong Kong context. We had protests to discuss. We had COVID-19. We were still dealing with sheltering in place, and the dialogue was on how do we talk to young children about the things that they're seeing in the world right now. And then you fast forward to June 19th. Like, when I looked at May 29th, I just want to give this for a context of change. When we were talking about COVID on May 29th, this is where we were. We were looking at around 6 million, I'm estimating up. We were looking at around 6 million people who had COVID or who were dealing with this global pandemic. And if you fast forward to today, that number has skyrocketed. So just in the time between May 29th, when we started, and today, and I know my picture may be in the way, so that's from June 18th, okay? So from yesterday to today, look at that dramatic change, just in the case of COVID. And that is one context of tremendous change. But we know globally, we're continuing to experience change. It's not just limited to COVID. I almost wish we were only dealing with one thing, but we're not. We're dealing with the pandemic, and we're also seeing the world begin to talk about racism. And I don't know if you saw this, and if you didn't, I will share this in the YouTube notes because it was phenomenal. The UN held a debate on global racism against people of color. And it was so powerful as an African American to hear George Floyd's name being said by different governments all around the world. And then they also were honest enough to say it's not just an issue. Racism is not just an issue in the United States. This is a global issue. And they began to share their names. They began to talk about the people who were protesting. And so when I thought about how I wanted to share with you all about change, I thought, protest and all of the things our young children are seeing are very relevant issues. But it's also a difficult issue for us as adults to think about how do we begin to prepare and empower these young children to deal with change, be it social change, be it resistance to change, be it a shift in how society is going about their daily lives. And the signs that I've shared with you, when I saw this one, I teach Black students, I cannot be silent. I thought about, my God, think about the global ramifications of what people may be experiencing if they're teaching young children of color, whether they be specifically identified as Black, they could be identified as indigenous, they could be identified as a wide variety of context. But talking about such deep-seated things like systemic and inherent racism. George Floyd is the police brutality. That's sort of like the outcome of the deeper issue. But the global conversation that's happening now is acknowledging that there are systemic injustices and racism that are built within the fabrics of a lot of our nations, and we're interested in dismantling these aspects, or we're interested in bringing more people to the table so we can dialogue change. And for the parents that are out there with young children, particularly young children of color, this is a moment where the mother who's holding her child really resonates, because you may be looking at this issue from a deeply personal perspective. But I want you to know that you're not alone in your concerns. And I shared all of the slides, all of the pictures on this slide to let you know specifically that the world is aware of what's going on and that people all over the world are standing up to say that your child's life is important. And there are educators like myself and the wonderful people who are on this call who are interested in learning how they can be an ally or how they can improve the work that they're already doing. So that is my message to the mothers who have sons of color in the U.S. or globally, particularly mothers of Black sons have been sharing a lot of profound things on social media. And it's hard to think about having that on your heart and having that uncertainty. And I haven't been fortunate enough to have kids yet. Maybe it's in the cards. But for other people who are mothers or who are fathers, I do have a niece and a nephew, and I can understand what it is to have a Black nephew and think about things. So I am going to walk you through some outstanding children's literature that can help not only facilitate these conversations, but empower and change the way young children may be experiencing this moment so that they come out of this with a resilient spirit, okay? Oh, is this okay? I was wondering, like, is this when the technical difficulties try to get in the way? Because we're rolling. All right. Now, why should we talk about change with young children? Before we get into the how, let's delve into the why. Why should we talk about these structural changes? And when I'm saying changes, remember, I'm talking about those UN Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm going to be talking about reducing inequalities and addressing systemic indifference, injustice, racism, these structural things that stop people from experiencing the highest qualities of life. Now, I will acknowledge, like I said, in this image, you see a beautiful image of George Floyd there's plenty of murals popping up all over the world. And one thing I want to point out about this image is that you begin to see the color that's mixed in with the dark shades of black, white, and gray. And I want you to look at this image as a sign of what change can look like. Yes, change can be scary. We're looking at the face of a man who tragically lost his life in front of the world. But I also want to point out what has grown from that dark experience. What light, what color is emanating from this? We have a global dialogue. You have a world that has been called to action to begin to dismantle these long-standing issues. And for that, George Floyd, his daughter, I think, said it best. Her father did indeed change the world. He is one of many, and we stand on his shoulders and we thank him for his unknowing sacrifice. That's like the most honorable way I can say something like that. But I also want to talk about why it's so important that we begin to talk with young children about these seemingly difficult things. I asked a wide range of parents across social media this week around how do you talk to young children about change? And I asked parents of early childhood children. I asked, I had parents respond who had children that were 2, 3, 12, 13, across the gamut. And I asked this question globally. And one of the strongest responses that came from parents was this concern that my children are too young. I don't want to have this conversation. I want to protect their innocence. And I honor that. Everyone's parenting journey is uniquely their own. But I do want to share some research on why this is a great time to start having these dialogues in age-appropriate ways. I've shared one of my favorite slides from the Center on the Developing Child with Harvard University. If you've seen me talk publicly, if you've seen any of my global talks, I always share this information because I think it's crucial that we understand how brilliant children are that first year of life, and it continues. Like, what I'm showing you is that in the first year, their sensory pathways, their language, and their higher cognitive functioning, they're just breathing genius. And they can't turn the learning off. And you continue to see this trend until we get down to like 15, 16, right? The higher cognitive functioning skills, they continue to develop out into teenage years, but they peak really in those early childhood years and those elementary years. And in terms of having the ability to have high sensory pathways, have high language development capacities, have that higher cognitive functioning, you're really, really seeing it blossom in those first 5 years, first 3 years. And in some cases, you can even look at the 8 to 9 to 10, which is why I love elementary. And I could get really technical into this, but I'm just going to give you a light overview for now. But by age 3, 80% of your child's brain has developed. By age 5, 6, we're dealing with 90%. If you're familiar with Montessori and their model of how they approach early childhood development, they call this phrase the absorbent mind, which sort of brings to mind a sponge. You know, like if you put a dry sponge in water, it can't help but to absorb everything around it. I know, awesome analogy, right? Because when we put our young children in the world, doesn't matter what we try to control at home, they can't help but absorb everything that's around them. So whether we're talking about it or not, this is going to be one of the things that they see. They may see a protest. A psychologist friend of mine, she was sharing that her 3-year-old son, they were at home. Everybody's working at home still. And they left the TV on and, was watching the news. And it was a story about something innocent. And before they could change the channel, the next story that came on was talking about the protest. And it had the image of people being killed. We know we're dealing with several incidents of this in the U.S. And so even when you have people who are professionally trained to have these dialogues, the world can still find ways to get in. Now, I want to move myself for a second because this is a very important quote. So you're just going to see me take a little tour around the screen so you can see this in its fullness. This research shows that by kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes that adults in their lives hold. At this age, they also learn to associate some groups as better than others. So if you have a situation where your child is being exposed to diversity and all of these things, then they're going to be far more open to interacting with children who may look different than them. If they are in a situation where they're not exposed to a great deal of diversity, they may begin to be a little hesitant or be a little wary because it's something new. It's something they're not familiar with. And that's where reading aloud and really engaging in these materials and having these dialogues prepares them for that moment because they can think back to a story they read. And if you want help with that, that's why I'm here. But I also want to talk about the sad side of this research, and that it shares that at this same age, children who are in the groups that are racially identified as inferior or less than begin to associate themselves. We start to see it as early as that age. I am not saying that that's a blanket statement and all children come in with that because all children aren't socialized that way. Some children are consistently affirmed, but they may find themselves, and unfortunately this is something I have personally dealt with in parents that I've worked with in the past. Children can be confronted with racial stereotypes as early as kindergarten. In fact, we know that this often peaks at the ages of 4 or 5. Children's racial prejudice. And what does a child's racial prejudice or what does that look like? It's in who they decide to play with. It's in who they interact with. It's the way in which they may shelter themselves off, or sometimes it's literally in the derogatory things this child may say, such as, this is a direct quote from a parent. She told a mother shared with me that her son was told he could. A girl in the kindergarten class shared that she wouldn't play with him because his skin was dirty, because his skin, she associated the melanin as dirt, and told him that he should never wear red shoes because they look ugly on his dirty skin, and that's heavy, right? That's heavy. And this mother, in pain and hurt, shared that her son came home crying, talking about these difficult things, and literally threw off his red shoes and said he would never wear them again. Now, that's a difficult thing for anyone to deal with. That's particularly a difficult thing for a child to deal with. And so you can only imagine all of the affirmations and work that had to be done to help that child overcome that. And I am going to share some books that'll also help you deal with that, if that is something you've had experience with, or if that is something you want to protect your child against ever doing unknowingly, because it's something new. And here's the thing, when we don't talk about these things with children, they form their own opinions. They form their own rationales. And so, again, this one is a firsthand experience because I'm a global educator, and I have been so fortunate to teach and love on and be loved by children all over the world. And I was in an international school. I was in a local school in Hong Kong, and I was there for some celebration of the world, right? So kudos to that school because they were already thinking about bringing in diversity. And I was there for their global day. And I was with a group of elementary students. Now, these children were like 3rd, 4th grade. And we were in a small group. We were laughing. I was happy. I even have a photo of this. I might share it on my IG so you guys can see my receipts. But, we were talking and they were engaging with me. And I guess, one of the kids finally felt comfortable to just share this dying question that was on his mind. And he said, with confidence, mind you, God bless this child, he said, you must really love chocolate milk. And I said, well, why do you say that? I mean, and coincidentally, I do, particularly Kowloon Dairy chocolate milk. Hong Kong, I miss you. Kowloon Dairy chocolate milk is absolutely my jam. It is, in the glass bottle. I digress. So when he said, you must really love chocolate milk, I was like, how does he know? How does he know? And I said, yes, I do love chocolate milk. And he said, with pride, I know, and that's why your skin is chocolate. Oh, no. No, sweetheart, that is not why my skin is chocolate, but that is a valiant attempt. And it's funny in the context because I think it perfectly illustrates the innocence that children bring to these really heavy things, right? And why it's so important that we as the adults usher them into a greater understanding. And I am thankful for that beautiful child because he gave me an opportunity to talk about melanin and talk about my ancestry and who I represent as a woman who identifies as African American and what my culture says about me. And we left that dialogue with a deeper understanding of each other. And when I shared with them, who I was and what I represented in my skin tone, I then asked him, can we be friends now that you know this? Do you still want to continue to get to know me? And this child, with just this beautiful smile, shook his head and said yes. And what that did in that moment was all the children around us also grew in their understanding. And so I want to share that as I shared, children as young as 2 years old begin to, express racial differences. But on that flip side, and here is one of my favorite pieces of research to share. Again, taking a tour around the screen. Explicit conversations with 5 to 7-year-olds about interracial friendships can dramatically improve their racial attitudes. And this particular research said as in little as 5 to 7 days. Okay? So talk about a strong return on investment. Like, you could not ask for a better outcome when talking about such deeply seated issues. If you have an in-depth conversation, which reading aloud provides you with, okay, I gotta just sneak preview one great book, Mo Willems. So if we were reading this book and it's talking about, allowing different people to play with you or finding different ways to include people or in this animation, you have a snake who wants to play catch. Now, the obvious issue is, how can a snake play catch? They have no arms. But the opportunity in the story that it allows you to discuss, how do we make room for people who may be different? And I want to step outside of race because I'm global and I'm thinking about this from an inclusive standpoint. And I also want to include children with disabilities. Okay. I also want to include that when we talk about embracing everyone, when we're talking about changing mindsets, we want to open this up to welcome the world and the world of experiences. And that's not only limited to what we see. It's also expanded to people who may have special abilities. Having a deeper sense of compassion and empathy and care as to where we're raising children that think of ways to include everybody, not just based on skin tone, but let it be on mental ability. Let it be on people who may be identified as special needs. Let them see opportunities to have friendships across the wide spectrum that this world presents, even in gender non-conforming sexual identity preferences. Like, we want to raise children who are open to the world and who are willing to listen to the world. So, yay, kind of got on a tangent, but that's how much I love this work. Let me continue on so we can get to the questions, because I'll be talking and you'll be like, well, Keisha, when are you going to get to the books? I'm getting to the books now. So how should we talk about change with young children? This information I have, again, highlighted the Sustainable Development Goals. If questions are coming up, and I'm seeing a few, I will happily get to them. Now, I want to go through these few things around talking about equality and racism with children. All right. Now, how do we do it? First, I acknowledge that it is difficult difficult changes, such as what we're talking about, or if we're in a broader context where, children were going to school, then they weren't, and now in some countries they're starting to go back to school, but everything's different. These difficult changes strip away assumptions, and it provides an opportunity to reflect on what matters and re-examine how we interact with the world. So I want to share the opportunity within the problem. And Pia, if you're still here, I know you will definitely appreciate this one. Book shout out, What to Do with a Problem. This is a great story that highlights that point, that yes, we may be dealing with the problem. And I love this story. But it talks about how we may have problems that follow us, and they may be things that we're intimidated by. But at some point, we have to face them. And when we begin to face them head on, we actually flow into a beautiful opportunity to re-examine how we look at the world, or to think higher than ourselves. And so I love this book, What to Do with the Problem. And I will list all of the books I share within the Caring Conversations. I always list the books within the description. So don't worry about, catching the titles and all that. I promise you I got you covered. Are you having a good time? Because I'm having a great time. And it's like 9 in the morning. And I'm just like, oh. But I love talking about books, right? So as we have these difficult conversations about change with children, as the adult, I want you to understand that children's reactions to stressful events may vary. Some children, there's a term called regressing. And some children may become more clingy. They may sort of do things that you may have felt like, I thought we were past that milestone. But that may be how they're showing you that they're stressed. They may want more cuddles. They may want to be held more. They may be quick to be very emotional when you leave. And that is a sign that, my child is experiencing stress. And what do you do in that moment? Okay. Now, there's several things you can do. First off, love. Love, love, love on that child. Love on that child. Reassure that child. Because in the simple act of loving on that child, they get this sense of security, and it releases, their brain releases chemicals that buffer and calm them down against the harmful impact of stress. The research on this is outstanding. If you want to know more, check out Harvard Center of the Developing Child, and in their search bar, just type in toxic stress, okay? Or just type in stress, and they'll share some of their white papers, which really outstanding work. Now, thank you, Pia. It is an awesome book. I also want to share, as we're talking about helping children deal with stressful events, I want to share some books that particularly talk about mindfulness, listening to my mind, okay? Listening with my heart. These 2 books are really centered on teaching children how to self-regulate their emotions, because in the world we live in, your children aren't always going to be around you when they're feeling stressed. And so through reading aloud, you can begin to teach them how to self-regulate their own emotions, how to breathe, how to notice when they're feeling feelings that are conflicting or that are heavy, or when they're feeling angry. They may not understand the depth of what it means to be stressed. So you may have to simplify that language. And I'm more than happy to work with you on that if you want to schedule a consultation and go into greater detail. But for now, as my offering to the world, I want to share that these are several great books. So listening to my body is all about noticing how your body feels. Do I feel tight? Am I sore? Do I have a headache? Like, what's happening in my mind? And then how do I calm that down? And then listening with my heart challenges children to think about what it is that they're feeling on an emotional intelligence level. And it begins to teach them to be still, to center themselves. Both books really talk about meditation. And what I really love about this series is that it does it from a diverse standpoint. Okay? So also, I'm big on growth mindset. I love Dr. Carol Dweck's work in this area. And so I'm always looking for children's books that really promote growth mindset. So after we have taught children how to listen to their body, how to listen to their heart, we want to work out. One day there's going to be like, maybe you can see a little bit of muscle, a little vanity moment. But we want to work out their minds. We want them to grow strong minds, right? And so this book called My Strong Mind talks about a young girl who is encountering difficult situations, difficult situations, but she tackles them with a positive attitude. Is it always easy to be positive? No, but it is one of the best skills we can instill in young children. Because here's the thing about a difficult situation. You can either choose to look at it negatively, or you can choose to look at it positively. Either way, you're making a choice. And here's what we know. If you go the positive route, then you are far more likely to come out of it with a spirit of resilience and a stronger sense of determination than the person who goes into it from a negative standpoint. So they are far more likely to give up. They are far more likely to just allow themselves to be absorbed into a negative outcome and not fight their way out and rise above it. I think about eagles, okay? Eagles fly above storms and they sail on the wind of a storm, okay? We are raising children who are going to rise above their problems and use the wind of that storm to help them sail through that storm until it ends, and then they realize that they've obtained a skill that helps them rise above and succeed. All right, I could keep going, and I'm going to try and stop because I just love what I do, and I'm starting to see questions. So maybe I'll stop here. I think I'm seeing a few questions, so I will pause here and answer them. And I think this is a great quote to stop on. Humans are programmed to be resilient, to grow and learn from difficult things. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And yes, they do. Let me see. Who asked me some questions? Oh, look at, I got to write you a hug. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay, let's see. How do we talk about equality or racism with children? Great question. And the first thing I want to say is that it is a loaded topic that you want to approach in an age-appropriate way, okay? And there is so much to talking about equality or racism that I like to approach it from a lens of equality, okay? So before I even delve into racism, we want to establish in the child's mind through the books that we're selecting that we've introduced them, like just as I did when I was talking about mindfulness. If you notice, I use books that intentionally show diversity. Every book that I've shared with you right now, even in the animal books, there's always this lens of diversity. But sometimes we have to talk about the really heavy things. And that's where this book, Island Born, really gives you an opportunity to explore real life situations where people had to deal with inequality. Okay? And this story talks about a child whose family immigrated to a different part of the world. I don't want to assume that it's the U.S. because I'm global. Let's assume they went to Singapore. Let's assume they're in Germany. Maybe they're in Europe. This child her family has immigrated. And within the context of her story, she's in class one day and her teacher gives them an assignment. Okay? In fact, you know what? I'm fancy now. Well, look what I can do. Oh! Yay! And I have one more little thing. No, I'm not going to do too much because if I mess up the live stream, I'll be mortified. So if you see, you have this outstanding story where you're already seeing inclusive classrooms. You're seeing diversity, right? And the teacher gives the assignment to the class to draw a picture of your home country or draw a picture of the country you are originally from, your first country, and bring it in tomorrow. That is what she asked the class to do. And this little girl experiences a problem because she doesn't remember the island her family is from. And so her teacher suggests that she talk to the people in her community and listen to their memories, right? And as she goes into her community and she begins to ask people, what do they remember about the island they're from? And so people talk about the music, They talk about the food, and people have all of these beautiful memories to share of what life was like in the island. And they talk about like how hot the sun is and all this beautiful language until she comes across one of the elders, and he talks about some of the difficult things that were also on the island. And he shares that there was a monster that rose up and held the island captive for 30 years. That imagery right there, talking about a monster, talking about these heavy things that can sometimes show up and hold people captive. That's where we can begin to start talking about those heavy things like racism, like inequality, like injustice. And we can do it in a way that's child friendly. And I want to give you an example of what that might look like. So in the story, we understand that this monster shows up and begins to treat people differently, begins to say, only this group can go to school here. Only this group can live in this area. Only this group can start a business and thrive. This other group, you will have to make things very hard. You can't play with this group. You can't live with this group. And if you're listening to what I'm saying, I'm actually giving factual descriptions of what racism has done across our world. But here's the hope. The monster is defeated by men and women who stand up, who are brave and courageous, and begin to demand that things change. And they find hope. And I want to share the language that this story uses. Lola's heart was pounding. So what happened next, Mr. Mayer? What should always happen to monsters? Heroes rose up. Oh, sorry. Heroes rose up. Strong, smart young women just like you, Lola. And a few strong, smart young men too. They got tired of being afraid and fought the monster. What a titanic battle that was. The whole island shook from their struggle. The monster tried all of its evil tricks. But in the end, the heroes, I'm just realizing you don't see this part, sorry. But in the end, the heroes found the monster's weakness and banished it forever. And that is how we began to talk with young children about difficult things such as racism and inequality. We also leave them with an understanding that these aren't final. We show them how to rise above that storm. And I love that this story talks about how people fought together. Young women, young men. And if you think about the protests that are happening all over the world, you're seeing children, you're seeing elders, you're seeing every age range, every demographic right now. In fact, historically, we are witnessing the largest global protests in our world's history. And it's around an issue as deeply rooted as inequality and racism. And it's around an entire global movement that says this has got to stop. And like the story said, even though the monster may try its evil tricks and try to do everything it can to remain, a people united that are voting, that are raising their voice, that are demanding to be heard will eventually find the weakness of the monster and defeat it. And that is a great way to talk about racism and inequality with children. Thank you for that outstanding question. Okay, let's see. Do we have some more? Growth Mindset for Children? Yes, it is awesome. I should read this book. Yes, it is. It is. Oh, okay, let's see. Sammy, I see your question. I have no children. Me too. But I have two cousins who are 8 and 9 years old. I have a niece and nephew that are 8 and 10. Ooh, I hope I got that right because they're going to give me a hard time if I got it wrong. I learned that it's the right time for them to know about these important issues. Oh, hashtag you got this. Thank you. Yes, that's very true. It's a great time. And honestly, you can start from the moment they're born and the literature you introduce them to. Let's see. Should I be the one to teach them or just pass it to their parents? Yes, I'd love to. That's why I'm here, sis. Sammy, I got you. The way in which you can teach them these things can be in a form of education. Reading aloud. Reading aloud. And because my good friend Pia is in the room, I want to take a shout out. Take a moment to shout her out. There are outstanding organizations like Bring Me a Book, Hong Kong, that specialize in having a diverse range of books. There are so many great ways to talk about these things with children in a way that does not make a parent feel uncomfortable. If you're reading a book like this beautiful book right here, I Will Be Fierce, talks about a child who is determined to go about her day and face the things that she could be afraid of with fierce determination to overcome. For example, if you're reading aloud with your niece and nephew, and now, I mean, your cousins, because they're 8 and 9, and you know, they may have their own little things, but you're still the cool aunt. And so you know great ways to like spend time with them. And I don't care how old a child is, like I do riddles with my niece and nephew. They still text me at all times of day wanting me to share a riddle. So if you're doing things like reading aloud with your niece and nephew, you can find ways to have these conversations through a story. And when you do it this way, it's not the same as sitting them down and talking to them about difficult changes such as systemic racism, structural inequalities, injustice. That's heavy. And maybe the parents need to be there for that type of dialogue if you're going to have it in that, you know, sort of sitting down at a table way. But if we're reading a story and I'm telling you about a young girl who says, "Today I will be fierce. I will answer the call to adventure. I will put on my armor. I will go forth and explore new worlds." Now, as she goes through and explores new worlds, she says, "I will be fierce. I will take on the monsters that stand in my way." Now, she continues to go throughout her day challenging things like, getting on the school bus, dealing with kids who are bigger than her. And I do want to share that page with you because I think, particularly for your 8 and 9-year-old cousins, I'm still learning the camera angles, guys. So if you notice, you have a little girl, she's overcome the dogs, but now she has to go stand around older kids. And that's a very intimidating thing for any young child, even if they're 8 or 9. The whole idea of having to be around older kids, the cooler kids, that's very daunting. But she says, "I will dare to walk with the giants." And that's what we want to challenge the littles in our life or the children in our life to do. We want to challenge them to walk amongst giants. We want to challenge them to take on those difficult things. And depending on where your cousins may be, if they're interested in more complex reading or stories for older children, there's also a lot of great authors to look into. I really love Jason Reynolds. If depending on the level of the child that you're dealing with or their reading capacity. And I'd also recommend comics. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to get up because I'm conflicted, but I won't. I'll stand out. I won't get up. I won't get up because staging is a lot of work. But I do want to share this. John Lewis has a 3-volume comic graphic novel series called March. It is, how can I talk about it and not get up? Is it close? You asked such a good question. You're going to force me to get up. But I got to get up because you need to see this. I can't find it, but I did find another one. So if you do want to talk about some of these things for a younger adult or from a older child's position, Henry Louis Gates wrote a young adult's version of his fascinating read, Stony the Road on the Reconstruction Era. Abram Kendi wrote an outstanding book on called Stamped from the Beginning, and he did it in partnership with Jason Reynolds. And again, as I shared, John Lewis, he has his 3-series comic book novel on the civil rights era. So those could be gifts that you give to your niece and nephew. See, now I'm going to be on a hunt, like, where is my books? They're behind me. I can't even get to them. I just realized where they are. But yes, I'll share it with you in the comment section. Let's see. Are there any more great questions? Island Board is a great book. Yes. Thank you, Pia. And when you read to children, have so much fun with the voices. Like, if you can believe it, even though I've been all over the place, this is really tame for how I tell a story. Because if I have kids in front of me, I'm pulling out all the stops. Like, I'm giving you drama. I'm serving you voices. I'm in the zone because I love the power of a great story. Let's see. Who else? Do we have any other questions? Could we buy these books on Kindle? Yes, you can buy the books on Kindle, but I also want to share with you, to the extent that you can, also think about audiobooks. Audiobooks for children's books or children's literacy is amazing. And I say that because they work in all these really cool sound effects and they invite children to use their imaginations. So perhaps you can look at doing it in tandem. You may have the Kindle and then you may have the audiobooks. And I can say that I know during the COVID sheltering in place, audiobooks, Audible made their children's literacy materials free. And I don't know if that's still going on, but I do know that was something that was available. And they had audios of, or audibles, as they're branding, audibles such as Harry Potter, free. You know, this high quality recording. So I do want to share that with you as well. But yes, and honestly, in a realistic sense, a lot of people have been buying up books, particularly in this global moment, because I think the world is like, ooh, we did not talk about racism, or, oh, how do we explain protests? And kids being kids, I'm pretty sure they started asking some questions like, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And so parents were like, ooh, we need to buy some books. And so a lot of books are really hard to come by. And that may be another great reason why you should look in, if you're in Hong Kong, why you should look in to bring me a book, because sometimes they may sell you some books. So Pia, I'm giving you so much love. Feel all the love because you've been doing outstanding work for years. Oh, did you ask a question? Yes, you did. Bring me a book, ask the question. Would love to hear your thoughts about the research behind empathy and fiction. Can you say more about that? Because my mind goes in several strong ways. Like when I think about the research around empathy and fiction, I think about children's books, specifically like these books. And I talked about this one in a previous story. All are welcome, right? And my understanding of that question, and you are always welcome to say more if you're thinking in a different direction. But when I think about the power of teaching empathy through children's fiction, I think about the necessity of taking approaches where we're blending in children who may be gender non-conforming. We're making sure that we're also addressing diversity. And where's one of my favorites? Where are you? Ah, here it is. We're challenging gender norms. This book, A Boy Like You, not only is it like, this is one of my favorite illustrators. Like, I absolutely love the work of Kayla Herron. I love the way she approaches illustrations. Look at this outstanding diversity. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Oh, all the feels, right? There are billions and billions of people in the world, but you are the only you there is. And the world needs a boy like you. And when we talk about empathy in fiction, like, look how, first of all, the character is a person of color. The main character is a person of color. That's also something to be very aware of as you're going through children's books. Think about the role of diversity within the main characters, not just the marginal characters that are in the background, but what is the author saying? Did they pay attention to that? And in this story, you see not only boys, you also see girls playing sports that may be traditionally thought of as boys only. And you also see this child playing tennis, and you see them in other roles that you may not usually see. And the story continues to talk about how a boy like you can be so many other things. You can cry, you can raise your hand and ask questions, you can take chances, right? Got to get this glare. That'll be the next thing I work on. And it just begins to show how being a boy doesn't have to mean that you're only one thing. Being a boy gives you the freedom to do anything. And it just really pushes back against the whole idea of the alpha macho man and says you can be all of these beautiful things. And another thing I love about this book is just that within the cover art, look at that. We see diversity, and we also see a child with special needs. And when I think about empathy in fiction, I think about authors, I think about children's books that take a concerted effort to send all of these silent signals of affirmation to children in the ways in which we present characters, in the ways in which we approach the storyline, in the ways in which we affirm the lived experiences of what it is to be a child today. So I've actually gone over, if you can believe that, I've actually gone over, but I love talking to you guys about these things. So this is great work, and I'm so happy that you're here. drkeishacares.com. Sign up for our emails. We have some wonderful things coming. If you want to work with me one-on-one, happy to do so. I have the ability to book consultations on my website, and I work with parents globally. I worked with some parents out in Singapore last week. Sheltering in place, like time is a vacuum. And I'm always happy to support any parent anywhere in the world. And if you're an organization or you're thinking about how can we approach these topics, how can we also work with what we already have? Because you don't always have to necessarily buy new books to talk about topics such as equality and racism. You can do it very effectively with older books. And I just love showing parents and organizations and educators how you can get the most of what you already have. For example, I have a couple of classic books. I know I said I'm over, but here I am still showing you more books, but that's how much I love what I do. So this is a very great book that talks about death. And this book came out in, I believe, 1983. Woo, 1983. I'm not going to tell my business, but I relate to that year. But it's still relevant today. It's still an outstanding understanding of how to help young children understand death, particularly death of a parent. Another classic, I Was So Mad. Again, you could connect this story to the books I showed you about mindfulness. And this is another class. Wow. Didn't realize it. This is a 1983 book too. Like, apparently I'm attracted to the year 1983. And this one is outstanding. It's another older book, but it's timeless in teaching children about filling up their happiness bucket and how we treat one another. Okay, clearly I could go on for days. Let me stop. I think I answered everyone's questions. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I will make this replay available on the YouTube channel. Thank you again to the Phoenix Foundation for this opportunity to engage in a global dialogue around things that mean so much. Continue to do the work. Dr. Keisha Cares. We have our caring conversations. I try to do them weekly. Usually they're on Thursdays, but we'll see if Fridays work. I think I may go back to Thursdays, but follow me on Instagram, get in touch with me, all these things. I always post. And last thing, I shared a dynamic resource on my Instagram feed about raising allies. It's a free, incomplete workbook from an outstanding organization called K is for Kindness. Go on the Dr. Keisha Cares Instagram, find the post. It's A is for Allies. You see all these little hands in the air. If you follow me on Facebook, you'll also see it there across all of the Dr. Keisha Cares social media platforms. That resource is free. It's a free PDF, and it is a perfect complement to what we talked about. And it also deals with writing, numeracy, skin tones. It's just a great workbook, and it's beautifully done. All right. I promise you, I'm leaving. Bye. Thank you so much for joining.